everyone. My name is Jared Altic, and I'm here with Jim Sutterby. Jim is a captain with the Overland Park, Kansas Police Department, and I want to talk to him about both his experiences in law enforcement and also the transition from police officer to police chaplain, which I'm calling Badge to Bible. Jim will be talking about the challenges getting into police work and the challenges in the work itself. And he will also share what he's doing to prepare for chaplaincy after he retires and what efforts he's already making to impact officer wellness. Hello, Jim.
Hello, Jared. Great to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. I was really looking forward to developing this idea to have you come and talk about, badge to Bible kind of thing. Now, you're still a police officer, and you're going to, how many years do you have before retirement? You have a ways to go, right?
So I've got probably about 7 years before I retire. Been an officer for 25 years, so so we're nearing the end, and so I'm starting those steps to prepare for what's next in my life.
Yeah, we know each other through playing basketball together. We have some mutual friends.
Yeah.
But as soon as I got involved in chaplaincy, I started seeing you pop up there too. And so a lot of police chaplain, first responder chaplain type activities and events, I kept noticing, there's Captain Sutterby. And
we were running into each other.
Yeah, helping out and volunteering and doing all sorts of stuff, leading and teaching and everything. And I'd like to talk to you about that today. But let's start out and talk about how you got into law enforcement. When you were originally, coming out of high school, that wasn't necessarily your goal, right?
No, some people say that they wanted to get in law enforcement from an early age, like when they were kids, but that wasn't the case with me. I actually wanted to be a mortician.
Really?
And it sounds kind of morbid, kind of same, I guess, along the same lines as what I'm doing now, but in a different way. But I just, I've always had this heart to serve people, and I thought, maybe I could serve people in their time of crisis, death in the family. You have a funeral home, you get contact with people who are in need, plus, they make some really good money. So I thought, hey, this would be a great career. And
did you have funeral directors like in your family already?
No, it was just something that I don't know really how it came about. It was just something that I just kind of got interested in, and then of course my kids love it when I say because people are just dying to get in. But they criticize me for telling that joke. They're like, Dad, don't do that. But so I just thought, hey, that would be kind of a cool thing to do with my life. And then when I was around 16, I was working in a library while I was going through high school, and I ran into a woman that I worked with at the library whose husband was trying to get on with the Kansas Highway Patrol. And she kind of started telling me about her experiences, really his experiences through our conversations, and it just kind of sparked an interest in law enforcement for me. And so she invited me actually over for dinner. Went over to this couple's house. They didn't have any children. It was just her and him. And he was about ready to turn 40. Okay. So he was really struggling because back then the Highway Patrol had an age restriction.
Yeah, he would have been almost too old.
Yeah, almost too old to join the troops. So he was really trying. He was up against the wall, and he was going through the process. And just the discussions that he had with me about the process kind of really started piquing my interest in that career. So I started doing ride-alongs. I signed up to do a ride-along with Merriam PD.
And this is while you're still in high school?
While I'm still in high school.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I did one with Kansas City, Missouri. And that even got me more excited about the profession. The things that spark everybody about law enforcement, the fact that it's different every day, there's something new, you're stretched, you're challenged personally, but also again that part of me that just wanted to help people.
Right.
And we joke about that a lot, with cops. We say, when they come in for interview, why do you want to get into law enforcement? We always say, well, because everybody answers, well, I want to help people. But it's really true. It's really the foundation of, I think, what officers are built on, and it's a purpose for us.
Yeah. So it really wasn't that much of a deviation from where you think you're going to help people in the midst of their grief.
Right.
Now it's more maybe helping people in the midst of their emergencies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it was just kind of further, just a different type of service. But I got my interest really piqued on it. And so I thought, as I neared the end of high school, I started looking at jobs in law enforcement. And back then, you really didn't need a college degree to get into the field.
Right.
So I started applying for records units or civilian jobs that were available.
Right.
And I just had no luck.
Because they still had a minimum age.
Yeah,
right.
still 21.
21. Right.
And just couldn't get through that door. Just couldn't get an interview, or I didn't live in the right county because I applied at places like Kansas City, Kansas. They have their cadet program. It was really strong, and I don't know how it is today, but it was really strong back then. And somebody had recommended that to me. Other departments. So anyway, through this whole thing, I started just trying to apply for places to get my foot in the door. Mm-hmm. I was going to a church up in Kansas City, Kansas, off of Parallel Parkway, about 47th Street, I think, or maybe farther west. Maybe it's farther than that, 55th, maybe. But it was called. It was a little small Baptist church that sat up on a great big hill. Maybe some of your listeners will know what I'm talking about. But I met a guy there who was a city councilman for Overland Park, and his name was Paul Sterrett. Appreciate Paul Sterrett. So Paul listens to this, it'd be great. But Paul came to me and he said, "Hey, I've been hearing that you're trying to get on, try to get your foot in your door. You got a real passion to be a policeman. I know some people at Overland Park. I'd be willing to, kind of hook you up."
Right.
And I was like, my pride got in the way, because I was like, I really don't want any help. I want to do what I'm on. I don't want anybody to say that I got,
like you rode someone's coattails.
Like I rode somebody's
coattails.
Right, so for a long time I resisted, getting Paul's help, but I kept meeting with these closed doors. And this kind of gets into where I think, kind of maybe a later question, but just kind of where God started kind of working in my life to open up these doors where I really knew that this is the path that he wanted to lead me into, because I went back to Paul after, just not having any luck at all. And I said, "Hey, I could use the help." And he was gracious enough to call a guy by the name of Tim Lynch. He was a major at the time with Overland Park PD. Mm-hmm. And he got a hold of me about a week later and said, "Hey, Major Lynch wants you to come in, meet with him. And it's not an interview. You're just meeting with him informally to kind of talk to him about, your aspirations, your goals, and things like that."
Right.
So I went in and talked to Tim about a week later. And after I got the interview, just went really smooth, went really well. He goes, "Hey, we're looking for records clerks. I'd like you to go across the street, get an application at City Hall and fill one out." And so then, like I said, the God just opened doors from that point forward, where I got in an interview pretty quickly. Interview went really, really well. Got hired and started with Overland Park in August of 1990 as a records clerk.
Okay.
And that's how my law enforcement career began. I started working in records, worked there for a few years, maybe till 93, about 3 years. And then I went to dispatch. Again, Tim Lynch, he saw the potential that I had and transferred me into that position. He happened to be in charge of that section of the department at the time, and so he got me in there. And then about 2 years later, I was able to work my way onto the street and got hired as a police officer, went to the academy in 96, and so I've been a cop ever since.
But that's got to be frustrating for a young man coming out of high school. You want to get involved in law enforcement. You have to wait for the minimum age, and then you got to get your foot in the door somewhere. And instead of it taking you 3 years, it was 6 years before you really got the job you wanted.
Yeah, it was kind of funny because I didn't get on until I was 24.
Yeah.
And I saw guys younger than me getting on, and there were some times in records and in dispatch where I applied to be an officer on like 3 different occasions, and each time something happened. The first time I got to the background investigation part, and they canceled the process, said they were going to redo it, reformat it. I had to start over, so I got kicked out of it, started over again. Yeah. Got to a certain point. Commander said he didn't think that I had the communication skills needed to be a police officer. Yeah. It was really ironic, pretty devastating, and that was real devastating to me because he actually even suggested that I go to Toastmasters, and maybe try to improve on my public speaking and my communication skills. I really didn't feel like that was an issue. Now, I didn't bad, good or bad, I didn't take him up on the advice. I didn't do that, but
Right.
it was a really difficult time because then I started second guessing what God
Right.
had, because He opened those doors for me to get on, and now all of a sudden these doors are closing.
Right. And see, and that's where wanted to ask you about how do you discern if you're really doing God's will. You got a lot of young Christian men, guys who grew up in church, and they think, well, I'd like to be a police officer, but there's doors that open and there's doors that close. And if God's sending a signal, it feels like a mixed signal sometimes. So how do you discern that? How do you know if being in law enforcement is the right thing for you?
I think part of it is trusting in God and trusting in what God has done in your life before to this point.
Right.
And understanding that there are going to be challenges and there are going to be times in your life when it seems like things aren't going the way that you planned it.
Yeah.
But that God has a purpose for each place that He puts you in. And sometimes, now, it's taken me 20 or 30 years to figure this out, but sometimes God, sometimes it's not about you. Sometimes it's about other people. And you need to be in a certain spot because maybe your influence is on other people and they need your influence in that place, that time, at that particular time.
Yeah.
And then when God's through with His purpose at that time, then He'll move you on to that next step. But I think trusting in Him, being in the Word, prayer, having that prayer time, and trusting in all those things that you've been taught as a kid that God's going to prepare the way for you. He's gonna come through, that He has come through, that His promises are true. I think all those things you got to rely on and lean into to discern, what God's trying to do in your life.
Yeah, I also think that sometimes we have a problem with perception because we feel like a door is closed because it didn't happen in our timing, and we have this huge presumption that our timing just must be God's timing because surely He would agree with me, and it's a little bit of our arrogance creeping in that we think this is going to happen the way we wanted it to, when we wanted it to,
or that it's going to be easy.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that leads into a great part of my life that, so I got frustrated at Overland Park because I felt like they just didn't value who I was. And I started relying on me.
Right.
And that's the other thing that we tend to do is we tend to rely on ourselves instead of relying on God. Mm-hmm. And when we start relying on ourselves and we start thinking as the world thinks, instead of thinking how God thinks. And even though God's this holy God, He's big, he's bigger than anything we can comprehend with our mind, we have to try to think more in God's terms than we do in the world's terms.
Right.
And so, one of the things that I learned this lesson a little bit initially was that I got frustrated. I decided I'm not going with Overland Park. I'll apply at KCK or I'll apply someplace else where I thought I could get on as a police officer. So I applied with KCK and I went downtown with another buddy of mine, and we went to the Jack Reardon Convention Center where they were having this huge hiring process, and it was really intimidating. But we went down there, and actually I made it through the first interviews, and they called me back and said, "Hey, you're in the process. You passed the first section. We'll get in contact with you here in the future on the next steps." Mm-hmm. Well, then the flood of '93 occurred, and during that flood, KCK had to put a freeze on their hiring. So I got a call.
Well, their shooting range was probably underwater.
It probably was, along with a lot of other stuff down there in the bottoms. But and so anyway, they put a freeze on their hiring, and they said, "Hey, we're not going to be able to process you right now. You're going to have to hang on, and we'll let you know when things free up. Hopefully, it won't be very long." Well, it was about a year, and by that time, God had taken me from. Now, I applied when I was in records to work at KCK. By that time, I ran into Lynch, Tim Lynch again. He said, "Hey, I want to move you into communications." So I saw that next step into getting onto the street with OP. So they actually called me back about almost a year later.
Casey K did.
Casey K did.
Yeah.
Casey K called me back almost a year later and say, "Hey, we want to continue the process with you. Are you still interested in being a Casey K police officer?" And I said, "Well, I think I'm going to stick it out with OP. Since I talked to you, I got promoted into dispatch, and I think I think this is where I need to stay." And so, God,
If not for that flood, you wouldn't have known you were about to make progress.
Right.
Where you were.
So
right.
God actually, that I truly believe that was God working. God was saying, "Look, don't get ahead of yourself. I'm working in this thing. It's on my time, like you said, like we just talked about.
Yeah.
It's on my time, not your time. You're trying to do things on your own. Give me an opportunity to work a little bit here, and you're gonna see the blessing out of it." So, and eventually I did. Eventually I did work my way onto the street and became a police officer. But that was a challenge for me. I was borderline ready to go somewhere else.
Now, transitioning to your years as a police officer, being in law enforcement is not an easy job. It doesn't exactly encourage someone to go to church. There's a lot of obstacles to growing spiritually while doing a job that's very important. It's a very godly, noble task, but it doesn't encourage godliness in the performance of the task. And so, can you talk to me about that, about your journey as a young Christian?
I struggled it. My faith was pretty strong. I felt it was pretty strong going in, but right as I turned 16, my parents had kind of a falling out with where we were at going to church. So we stopped going to church as a family right around the time I was 16 or 17 years old. And through that initial time, my faith had always remained. It's always been a focus of my life, but I wasn't doing all the things that I needed to do to keep my relationship with God from really being susceptible to Satan and his tactics.
Yeah.
And so, when I first got on, relied on him real heavily, but then I got into the culture a little bit, and the culture's kind of a rough and tumble culture.
A lot of alpha males,
a lot of proving that you're worthy of that you can hold your own. Started using language that wasn't reflective of my beliefs. Started just doing things that nothing. I never did anything that was horrible. Nothing ever illegal. But just those things that when you look at somebody, I wasn't different than the world. I was just fitting into the world.
Right.
And
it's a lot of pressure to fit in.
Yeah.
And act and talk just like everybody else.
Yeah, and you want to be accepted.
Right.
Especially in that. And it's. The law enforcement's like athletics. It's camaraderie. It's about the relationships. Yep. And sometimes you think the relationships you got to act like something you're not.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was doing. I was really acting outside of my character. Now, I met my wife in 93, and she was a daughter of a pastor, and she got me, of course, like all good women, she got me going to church with her.
Yeah.
So I started going to church with her on Sundays, and so then I started realizing how far I had strayed. And even then, after I got married, and then I'd go through these ebbs and flows with my faith. This is before I ever thought about being a chaplain or anything like doing any ministry work. It was like I'd be real good for a while, but then I get on a shift where I'm on midnights, I'm working Sundays, I can't go to church.
Yeah.
My wife and I would struggle because I wouldn't get up. I was too tired if I was on midnights to go to church. So then we would have these struggles about how she's got to go by herself. She felt like she was really a single mother.
Right. Yeah.
I was upset because I felt like I was letting her down. I know the responsibility of men that God places on us to be the leaders of our household spiritually.
Yeah.
And so, I was feeling guilt because I wasn't fulfilling that obligation, and that guilt turned into anger, turned into, our marriage didn't struggle, but in a sense, it was like close to being on the brink, but we weren't in a groove. The gears weren't fitting together, and so our family, therefore, just wasn't fitting and running smoothly. And so we just struggled with just how do we work, how do we have that church and work and life balance with our family.
And age range, this would have been like in your late 20s into your 30s maybe?
Yeah, this would have been definitely from late 20s into the mid 30s.
Okay.
So I started to reflect, like, where are you going? What are you trying to accomplish here?
Right.
With your family, with your faith. And I started looking around me, and I started to see the toll the job takes on people.
Right.
Started seeing some of my friends' marriages dissolve. Started seeing just how work debilitated them.
Yeah.
In some cases, drug and alcohol abuse.
Yeah.
And so I started really looking at this and seeing that then God just started laying on my heart this passion, or he started calling me. And at first I was resistant probably to it, but started calling me about, hey, you got to do something about this. You got to get involved somehow and speak into these, speak into the lives of these law enforcement officers. Try to minister to them in some way. And so I started kind of trying to figure out, okay, how does that look?
Yeah, I was going to ask, when was the first time, or can you approximate when did you first begin to do anything toward officer wellness? Was it church related? Was it something in the department? How did you get started in that?
Really started at work probably, as I think back about it, because our like a lot of agencies, probably ours were struggling to let our people know they're valued. Instead of just that they're just people at work.
Yeah.
And that you're an end to a means. And that sounds really harsh on the Overland Park Police Department. I don't mean it that way, because it's always been a great place to work. Yeah. It's just that I thought we could do more to show our employees that they were valued, that they're important, that what they do is noble. And so I I started working with officer recognition. That was the first step, is started looking into how can we revise recognition, how can we recognize people more for what they do on a regular basis so that we could try to encourage their well-being, lift their spirits, mental health-wise, they'd feel good about the job. It'd start to turn kind of that part of wellness. It kind of turned it into a wellness initiative.
I run into a lot of young officers where I think at least their perception is that the only time they encounter the commanders is when they're being disciplined. And it feels, of course, law enforcement always has a very military-like disciplinary mindset.
Sure.
And so it's usually pretty harsh, pretty tough, a lot of verbal beatdowns.
Yeah.
and
it's rough and tumble, right?
It is, and it needs to be. There's reasons for that, but sometimes the perception is, well, they're just going to keep beating us until morale improves.
Sure. Yeah.
It's defeating at times for some personalities, and so this recognition and stuff you're talking about, that probably does do a lot for just job satisfaction.
Yeah, it started to show that they were. I mean, really, what we're talking about is loving people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what we're talking about here, and that was my way of starting to shine a little light on law enforcement. Was, hey, you are valued. What you do is important. It's critical. It's not just, it's not just another job. And some people have the idea that, well, that's just giving CPR and saving somebody's life. That's you doing your job. So thanks for coming in today and doing what you're supposed to do. We can lose ourselves in law enforcement into that mindset,
right,
and start to devalue how important people are.
Yeah. And
that's what my goal was initially, was trying to say, hey, look, you're loved. Now some cops be listening to this and going like, really? But you're loved, you're cared about, you're a value to.
But use a different synonym for it. You're appreciated, you're respected.
Right.
There's a lot of guys. You say love, they'll shuffle their feet and say, oh, whatever, I don't care.
Right.
Yes, they do. If you just phrase it in terms of like respect, Well, no, okay, now I'm really interested.
Sure,
Because almost every guy wants that.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Right. So I started there with that. Then that kind of moved into looking at this class called Blue Courage. And a lot of people in law enforcement will know what Blue Courage is.
I've sat in a class of Blue Courage.
So KLETC was doing a kind of a supervisor's overview of Blue Courage down in Hutchinson, Kansas. So I went down there to that presentation and liked a lot of it. There was a spiritual component to it, and it just talked about how noble the profession is, encouraging officers to understand that, man, this job is ordained by God.
Yeah.
In Romans 13, 1 through 4, it talks about how, this is ordained. These things are put in place because God put them in place. You're put in place to keep law and order because of the things that God put in place. And so what you are doing is what you've been called to do. Now, whether you realize it or not, that's the truth.
Yeah.
And so,
because God built us, God designed us. He knows how we're wired. And without law and order, society collapses.
yes,
And so you see in Romans where it says that, those who bear the sword, they're God's servants.
yeah,
And so this is appropriate to think of law enforcement in terms of a godly mission.
yes,
That's not something new or artificial. I mean, I feel like that's baked into the cake when it comes to Western civilization.
Yeah.
That we would have at some level, whether it was the king's men back in the day or modern day law enforcement, it's a basic element of Western civilization that we have people who keep law and order.
And I think you hit on a key phrase there that I always talk about when I'm talking to cops it's about service. They don't bear the sword for no reason, and they're servants of the Lord.
Yeah.
And so we're servants, and I'll be honest with you, this is where, for me, chaplaincy and law enforcement intersect, because pastors and cops are a lot of the same in a lot of ways. We both meet people in their worst arenas.
Yeah.
They're in crisis a lot of times, and we meet them in those crises. Now, yes, pastors have a different role to play in that, but still, we're meeting people's needs. As cops, we're serving people. Sometimes it's by taking the bad guy out of the mix so that the victim's safe. And pastors, it's I'm meeting this victim where she's at to listen, to try to encourage and try to pick up the pieces of what's been destroyed and give them hope.
I've always felt that the Venn diagram between cops and ministers overlaps significantly. There are obviously some differences, but yeah, people typically don't want to see us unless they need us.
Right. Right.
People often take their anger out on us inappropriately. And both of us, the job, because you see people at their worst, because you're always there on their worst day, it can drive cynicism.
Yes.
And I've known a lot of ministers, a lot of preachers, and a lot of cops, and a lot of people in corrections too, that are just so cynical about human nature because they are always dealing with other people's problems. And so I feel like there's some sort of mutual support thing that ought to happen.
Right.
And that's where chaplaincy kind of kicks in.
Yeah.
Now, let me back up just one step and ask about young law enforcement officers. You've mentioned a few different categories where you felt like, it intersected your life and where things that you're interested in. What kind of areas do law enforcement officers need wellness support, whether it's from the department or from a chaplain or from a church? What areas, are really kind of the big areas in your mind?
Well, I think first of all, there's a huge need for spiritual wellness. Okay. I mean, that's. I'll talk about 4 pillars of wellness here, but really, what I did a paper on wellness for my bachelor's degree, which I just finished here recently, which was a big accomplishment. But one of the things that I chose to write on was wellness, and you have the physical component of wellness where to be feeling good about yourself, self-esteem, and You need to be in good physical, or not. You don't have to be an athlete.
You need to be healthy.
But you need to be healthy.
Yeah.
Good
And a lot
diet,
of us aren't.
getting sleep.
Yeah.
Getting good sleep, and we don't get a lot of good sleep in law enforcement. We get about 6 hours a night.
Yeah.
Most studies will show you that you need 8 or 7 at the very minimum to be really effective day to day. So, just the physical component, I've talked about that with law enforcement, young guys and gals. Second thing is the mental part of it, the mental health part of it is just, getting out of the circle of, I call it like the Fockers, the circle of trust, because we tend to just gravitate towards cops. And so we only get one perspective of the world, and that's the police perspective. Mm-hmm. When you venture outside of the police world and you have, this is where church comes in, where having a good church family comes into play, because then you can build relationships outside of law enforcement. Sometimes you need people outside of the cop world to say, hey, look, just that fact, you're being cynical. Yeah. Not all people, what are you doing? You get that accountability kind of checks and balance with, is everything okay with you? Because the way you're talking about stuff is just not like normal.
Yeah.
And so, we build those relationships with those that are outside of our circle in the police world. So that mental health, do you exercise? Do you get away from, do you have something to do to help you deal with the stress of law enforcement?
Right.
And because stress then can attack our marriages, can attack our relationships with our kids, with our friends. And so we need some way to offload all that hyper vigilance that we've been under for the last 8, 10, or maybe sometimes 12 hours if we're working that kind of a shift.
Right.
So there's that mental health aspect. There's the financial aspect of it, which one of the things that I've been working on at Overland Park PD is we've got a chaplain in our chaplain group. She's a trained financial coach with Financial Peace University.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so she's willing to put on, we're going to be putting on that Financial Peace University for our officers and giving them an opportunity in the future to participate as a couple.
Oh yeah.
In that program. So we're hoping to get that off the ground pretty soon. And then, but just talking about retirement and talking about, are you planning for the next phase of your life? Are you putting yourself up? And I had some people that came into my life for believers that thought enough to say, hey, have you put some money in this 457 account over here? Take advantage of this thing, And so just having, just talking about those things, but then to round that out is a spiritual component of, that really everything in our life, kind of comes out of our heart. And our heart has, because what comes out of our mouth is really, the Bible says, is a reflection of what's in our heart.
Yes.
And so we have to have that relationship with God to guide our moral and our moral compass, our values. What's our core values? Mm-hmm. How Christ has asked us to live our life, and those kind of things are what are displayed in our service to the community.
Yeah.
And I really feel like when our relationship with God is bad, it's reflective in our marriages. It's reflective in our relationships at work, in how we treat people that we encounter, whether bad or good.
Yeah. How quickly we get angry.
How quickly we get angry.
Yes.
How quickly we get frustrated.
Yeah.
Did we give a little more nudge to somebody than we should have because we're just frustrated at other things outside of our life, and it's bleeding over into what we do as cops. So these are the things that really started getting me thinking about, man, there's so much that I could share with my experiences, with my faith, that could maybe help young cops.
Okay. Now, let's look into the future. You said you have several years yet before retirement, but if you do transition into being a police chaplain, what kind of chaplain do you want to be? What does that look like in your mind?
To me, it looks like, just building relationships and, coming in and doing what a lot of chaplains are already doing, at least ones that understand that everything has to begin in the police world with relationship. And we have to break down those barriers of, getting trust. So building trust and going into roll call and just saying, hey, guys, I'm not here to preach to you.
Yeah.
I'm not here to make you believe what I believe. I'm here to tell you that I'm here to encourage you. I'm here to be a part of the organization and to support you in any way that I can, whether that's just by having a cup of coffee with you. If you want to have a discussion about spiritual type things, hey, we can have the discussion without there being any obligation as to, whether you got to get saved or not.
Right.
But it's just about building relationships, showing these guys and gals that what they do is important and noble, and that they're called, and in order to fulfill that calling, they have to be healthy in those 4 areas that we just got done talking about.
Yeah.
And so any way that I can get in there, do ride-alongs, just talking to them, hey, how's the kids? How's the family going?
Yeah.
Is there anything you're struggling with? Is there anything that I can help you? Can I just listen to you?
Yeah.
And we know a lot of chaplaincy is just about listening to people.
Yeah, just being present.
And showing them that, hey, you care, and then having that confidentiality to know that, hey, what you say to me stays in the car.
Yeah.
Or what you say to me stays between you and me, so that, there's that trust, and hopefully then you can start to bring some light to the darkness.
Yeah.
And that's really, I guess that's kind of what it looks like to me, is just trying to enhance relationships and trying to then open doors and let God, here's the big thing. It's not me doing anything. It's just letting God work. Because God's gonna, all I got to do is put the seed out there, and God's going to cultivate that, and he's going to maybe bring it back around to where maybe I'm not going to be the one that gets to talk to him about, hey, what do you believe?
Right.
Where are you at in your relationship with Christ? Maybe it's going to be, maybe they go to their pastor because, maybe that chaplain Sutterby has something that, maybe he's onto something here.
Right.
So I just see myself as kind of the guy that's trying to minister in any way that I can.
Yeah.
But mainly just through showing these guys that I love them because they're cops.
Yeah.
And because I think that they are really critical to what's going on in the world.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful vision of chaplaincy, and there's lots of different types of chaplains, and really, I mean, maybe there's a different kind of chaplain for every chaplain, and I get that, and that's variety, and I don't expect everyone to conform to how I do it, but what you described is very much what I do. I get into about 100 roll calls a year. I do ride-alongs, at least before COVID. I did.
Yeah, COVID.
And a lot of my roll calls, I don't say anything. I'll say, no, Sergeant, I have nothing to add. That's the only thing I'm doing. I'm just there. I'm just present. And they see me over and over and over again. And then on the ride-alongs, sometimes they open up. Not always. I don't ask them to. I don't make them. As far as I know, I've never been given a ride-along because the person needed it. I was just randomly assigned. Although one guy was sure that his sergeant had put me with him for a reason. And he didn't talk to me for 2 hours. For 2 hours, he wouldn't say a word. And finally, I let on. I was like, well, I'm here randomly. I'm not here for any reason. Then he opened up and talked, and we have a great rapport now. But yeah, that happens on their initiation. If they want to, then they can talk to a chaplain. I hope there aren't chaplains out there trying to corner somebody.
And I think we have to understand as chaplains too, and this is one thing I would talk to chaplains about as I go forward, is that, remember, you're in their workspace. They're not in yours.
Yeah.
So you got to be respectful of this. That's their car. That's their office.
It's their time.
It's their time.
Yep.
And, you're a guest.
Yep.
And treating it like you're an invited guest and you want to get invited back.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of, as I see moving forward, that's kind of how I want to operate, is that, hey, and you could say maybe I have an advantage over some people because when I get into this thing, full time, then I'll have the law enforcement perspective of it, and so I have a little different perspective than some others. So if you're not a law enforcement officer and you're doing chaplaincy, then you gotta do a little bit more research.
There's a learning curve. Absolutely. Yeah.
To get yourself set up so that you can be ineffective, because you can be ineffective, and then you can, if you don't handle it correctly, you can put a bad light on other chaplains in your unit, or you can really shut down.
One pro tip, my recommendation is learn rank. Figure out how to identify an officer and what rank they are, and know it really well. Don't call a major a sergeant or vice versa, or whatever.
And to go along with that, I think what you got to be savvy to is as a chaplain, I'm not there to minister to the chief or the major's command staff. If the command staff wants me, they'll call me.
Right.
Now, don't get me wrong. If I get an opportunity to talk to a captain or a major, when I'm a chaplain, I'm going to take advantage of saying hi. And when I say minister, I'm talking about the ministry of chaplaincy, but not necessarily proselytizing or anything like that. I'm just saying being present. And I think, but your field in chaplaincy is the officers and sergeants, corporals if you have corporals, but it's from the rank of probably lieutenant down and not so much captain up.
Yeah.
Just because, I just feel like in our field, they don't want to be bothered so much, unless they have a relationship with you.
Yeah.
And you can create those things, and that's not a bad thing. Well, that's not any reason to be discouraged. It's just part of the law enforcement culture.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's just another one of those tips you learn, either because you've been in the job, or because you've done your research and you understand that that's just the way it is.
Yeah. So what are you doing now to prepare for a chaplaincy? What kind of things have you been involved in?
So let me tell you, chaplaincy isn't for the faint of heart. And I think any chaplain that's doing law enforcement chaplaincy is going to tell you this, or any kind of chaplaincy. It's not for the faint of heart because I'm not a chaplain. I didn't go to Bible college or anything like that. I'm kind of a lay person in that regard. I went, I got a great opportunity about a year ago to go down to Dallas, Texas. I went to Billy Graham Evangelical Ministry was holding a 1-week law enforcement chaplaincy training program, and as a part of that, you could become one of their rapid response chaplains. So I got a great opportunity to go down to Dallas. Went through the training, so I went through a week's training on that. I went to another chaplaincy training that was 3 days, put on by a chaplain out of Elkhart, Indiana, by the name of Pastor Bontrager.
Okay.
And he put on a great class. So I've been to a couple of law enforcement specific chaplaincy where they talk about delivering death notifications and the etiquette for writing with officers and those kinds of things. So that's kind of how you can get that if you're not a law enforcement. Now, for me, that was a lot of extra stuff that I already knew, but I got there was also things like how to listening and the things of ministry that were important to me that I was able to learn about. I got involved in the chaplaincy program that we have at OP. Also got involved with Midwest Chaplains Network and Kevin Hardy, who used to be a chaplain out of Kansas City, Missouri, but now he's gone full time just doing the Midwest Chaplains Network. So Kevin's been mentoring me a little bit. Jared, you've been kind of mentoring me. We've had discussions about chaplaincy. So I've been trying to seek out people who have experience in the field and are doing it and asking them different things, from a chaplain's perspective, more of a ministry perspective than a cop's perspective. Then the other thing that I'm doing, I'm getting ready. One of the chaplains at OPPD, Lynn Garrison, he volunteers as a hospital chaplain at Overland Park Regional. So I'm getting ready to start volunteering over at the hospital as a chaplain, just to start doing some actual boots on the ground chaplaincy work. Because right now, I can go to death notifications with my guys. I can meet the community needs as a chaplain at OPPD in my spare time outside of my regular duties.
Right.
But I can't minister to the officers really that great because I'm part of the administration. I'm a captain, and who's going to want to tell a captain? I'm in the chain of command. So that opportunity is not really there right now to really. Now I do it in other ways,
right.
As a leader of the organization.
You take care of your guys.
Take care of my guys, and I look at wellness and those kinds of things, but I don't have the really opportunity to do true chaplaincy work. So by volunteering up at the hospital, it kind of get me into working with people that are in crisis, suicide, victims of families who have had a person commit suicide or a fatal car crash or, those kinds of things, and start to really understand, how chaplaincy works.
Do you think that you'll be able to take the police officer hat off when you reach that point? When you retire, you're no longer a cop. Are you going to be able to do a ride along and not want to jump in?
No. I don't think I'll be able to, but I'll have to learn to.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I think this is where, again, pastors and cops intersect, because I don't think you ever stop being a pastor.
Yeah.
It's like I heard Pastor Stanley the other day. I was watching a podcast, and if anybody knows Pastor Stanley, he just stepped down after he's 87. He just stepped down from.
Man, I didn't know he was that old.
From pastoring as the executive pastor, but he said retirement is not in my vocabulary. As you know, I don't believe in retirement. I think a lot of pastors believe that, and I think cops. You never stop being a cop, even though you're not a cop. Yeah. You're still hyper vigilant to things. You're still aware of what's going on around you.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what gets you street cred when you're a chaplain. Is that you are.
It sure can.
You're not. It's not that I'm going to jump out and start being a cop, but at least I know what to look for. I know when he says, "Hey, did you see that?" I'm not just in the car as a passive observer.
Well, an average civilian, if you just grab them while they're riding down the street in a car, if you just grab them by the arm and say, "What street are we at?" Most civilians have no idea.
Right.
They know where they're going, but have no idea where they're at in the moment. And there's that kind of like situational awareness that is alien to us civilians, and I think a chaplain can learn that. But yeah, you've definitely been immersed in the culture for 30 years, and so you'll have some credibility with those young officers that you don't have. Our head chaplain is a 30-year veteran of law enforcement, and when I see him go into a roll call, he gets instant credibility for that reason, and so I think that's very beneficial. But it is a different job, and so it's a totally different hat. I mean, it's hard not to want to interfere or whatever. And,
it's hard not to get in and be the backup. Because it's like you're riding a 2-man car. But it's and who knows if chaplaincy. Who knows if it'll happen at Overland Park. My ministry. Really, it's open to where God's going to direct me.
Right.
And will it be a chaplain in this area? Will it be a chaplain in some other part of the country? Who knows yet?
Sure.
That's still yet to be determined. I've still got a few more years to be at OP. But
until you put that hat on, let me give you a chance to speak to younger officers who might be listening to this. What do they need to know? What does a young law enforcement officer really need to know to be spiritually healthy and to be to hear what a chaplain is trying to tell them and what you want to tell them? What would that be?
One, I'd say first, nurture your relationship with God.
Okay.
Because I think everything stems, as I spoke about before, is if you don't have a relationship, I'd encourage you, just start reading. Start in Romans. Romans is a great book for cops because it's all about the path, the rules, the
righteousness,
justice, all those things that we hold true as policemen.
Yeah, and in Romans, everybody's guilty.
Yeah,
right. So
so it's a great book, but it's just a great book to start in. Ephesians is another great book written by Paul. But anyway, just nurture that relationship, because I think then I'd say don't immerse yourself in just police work.
Yeah.
Have other interests. Get outside of police work. It'll benefit your marriage. It'll benefit your relationship with your kids. It'll reduce the mental and physical stress that comes with the job. So you got to have those avenues outside of law enforcement. You got to have a work life balance also. You know, try to guard your time a little bit. Now, I know life is, there's bills to pay. And, you know, but don't try to live outside your means.
Yeah.
Try to stay in that means. It's easy because we don't make a lot in law enforcement. And so, you know, you see other people around you that have a lot of great things. And you want those same things for your family, but not always can you do it on a law enforcement salary.
Yeah.
And if your wife is staying at home, and like mine did, you know, I picked up a lot of off duty to pay the bills. And so I was away from, that just takes me out of the home. That takes me away from my relationship with my wife. And those, and pretty soon you start to, instead of growing closer together, you're kind of growing apart because you're each living kind of a separate life. So I say, nurture that work-life balance, nurture your marriage, nurture that relationship with God, pay attention to, you know, one of the great things that we're teaching right now. Kevin Hardy and I have this class through Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. It's on spiritual fitness. And you can go out on their website and take a look at it if you're interested. It's a free course, and we're doing it virtually right now, but we're getting ready to, next year we're going to be going to 6 places across Kansas teaching this. And one of the things we talk about is just this idea that you have to be paying attention because Satan is always trying to get in there and divide us. We're seeing it in the world right now.
Yes.
If he can divide us, he can conquer us. If he can divide the church, he's always tried to get divisions in the church because of, it's always that divide and conquer idea. Same with our marriages.
Yeah.
If he can divide us, he can conquer us. And I want to see people in law enforcement have strong marriages. I want to, you know, because we hire the best of the best.
Yeah.
You go through an extensive background test. You go through all this work because we want the most honest, the people with the most integrity. And so I want men and women to have strong, healthy marriages.
Yeah.
And why shouldn't they be able to do that? But in order to do that, we have to make sure we're paying attention to each other, and that we're nurturing our relationship, that we're having that nice work-life balance. So those are really the main things that I think I would tell young cops: just don't get over immersed in the law enforcement life. Yeah, it can really suck you in, and before you know it, it's just nothing but police work. And then the last thing is, I know a lot of us, there'll be police officers that disagree with me on this point, but I say, guys, your wife or your spouse, husbands, wives, whatever, they want to know about your day. They do. They want to know because they can understand what you're going through better. And you don't have to give them all the gory details of what happened, but coming home and not sharing that kind of stuff just closes the communication. And I think in marriage, I think a lot of about having a healthy marriage is how we communicate with one another.
Yeah.
And if
more communication is almost always better.
More communication. Poor communication is always, you see, that is one of the top reasons people.
Yeah.
This isn't even from a poll. I have a marriage poll from 2019, and the top 3 things are infidelity, finances, and poor communication. That's what leads to divorce.
I bet it's been that for 100 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that's
so
pretty standard.
Yeah. And so we're just not doing ourselves favors. Not only do we have stress as cops, but then we come home and we just want to shut down.
Yeah.
And they want to know, they want to be able to support you and help you through these things. And if you communicate these things and how you're feeling and stuff like that, I know that sounds difficult sometimes, but believe me, you'll have a much stronger marriage if you do that with your spouses.
And it is something you and your spouse can learn.
Yes.
You can learn how to do that better. Just because it didn't work once or there was some sort of bad consequence, somebody got upset or whatever, it's something you can learn to do well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because, one of the things that I really appreciate about Deanna is that, she told me how she felt when I wasn't going to church with her. She didn't really understand how tired I was, or how coming home at 6 o'clock in the morning and then trying to stay up for a service, that's at 9 o'clock.
And not just physically tired, but because of the stress, emotionally tired.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think just talking through those things as young couples or as officers get into marriages, after they've been in law enforcement, just remembering to have that open line of communication with their spouses.
Yeah. Now, can you tell me again? Want to give you a chance to promote things, and so you were talking about the work you do with Kevin Hardy. Can you give me that information again?
Yeah. So anybody that's interested in seeing that can look at just type in Midwest Chaplains Network, and Kevin does a lot of stuff where he teaches a chaplain's course. He also has some different chaplains, just like Zoom meetings where we just talk about, hey, what kind of things are you having trouble with?
Yeah.
Bouncing ideas off chaplains. He also does some stuff where we had like a marriage Zoom meeting with Heidi Hogan. If any of you know Heidi, a lot of people know Heidi out there. Shout out to Heidi. But Heidi does a lot of stuff with marriage, and
she's a law enforcement spouse.
Yep.
Yep.
There's some things that we do where we just had, like, because of COVID, we just had a marriage Zoom meeting where couples could get on a Zoom meeting and basically just kind of like a discussion, really, about anything that anybody wanted to talk about. And then the other thing is just looking for our marriage conference. We put on a marriage conference every year. This year we weren't able to do it because of COVID. Mm-hmm. So look for that. It's in July, usually a third weekend in July.
Yeah.
Every year, but we're going to be trying to do it again in 2021. So that's just a great opportunity to be around other police officers and their spouses, and to have some great speakers come in, try to give you encouragement in the field of law enforcement to increase, just just to encourage your marriages, just to strengthen.
It's very enjoyable. Those conferences are just they're fun. They're good speakers. They're interesting topics.
I appreciate you saying that, because there's a lot. Heidi does a lot of work putting into the speakers and who we choose, and so. But anyway, so look for that in 2021. We're always trying to get those put on, and we always have a great lunch. Last year we had Chick-fil-A. So one year we had barbecue. So, I mean, we always try to do it upright, and we try to make it a reasonable cost to families.
Yes, very much so.
So that it doesn't break the bank.
Yeah.
But yet, because if you're coming from out of town, you're staying at a hotel. And we try to get a bank of hotels where you can get a decent, rate and that kind of thing. So anyway, look for those two things. And then, of course, I already talked about that class with Kelly. We actually have it on there for you to bring your spouse to the training too. When we taught it in Lawrence, we did have some spouses there, but the other classes, it's just been, different police officers from all over the state of Kansas. We had one guy that attended it because he wanted to bring it to their training academy in Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Oh, really?
So it's just been a place where God's opened some doors for us, and we've been able to strengthen and really just kind of encourage cops. And that's my goal. My purpose is, my purpose is about done in as far as the badge goes.
Yeah.
Now it's time to shift it over to this other, to your point of it's, badge to Bible.
Yeah.
And so that's really where I see God calling me, and where that, like I said earlier in the podcast, I don't know if it's going to be here in Johnson County or if it's going to be somewhere else, but I intend to serve somewhere, and it'll just be a matter of figuring out where God's going to call me to do that.
Well, God bless you, Jim. Thank you so much for coming in.
Appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, it was great.
All right. Thank you.